What's too high? What's too fat? What's gaining too fast?
The number I always, just as a rough rule of thumb, the number I kind of always go to for a competitor, especially if I know their stage weight, is like pushing much past 20% over stage weight could be starting to kind of not spin our wheels, but you're just creating more work for yourself. Like most people by then are already making, at a body fat that's allowing them to make really solid progress. I mean, there's going to be exceptions, but that's kind of where I tend to manage someone's off season, kind of bouncing, conservative gain up to maybe 20-ish% above, hold it for a bit if we'd like, and then just kind of run a mini cut and kind of rinse and repeat. But I think there's also, and Berto, I know we've talked about this some, like body fat distribution, like some people that may struggle some, like that are very lower body fat dominant, maybe staying a little bit leaner in the off season can have its advantages.
If you're a competitor.
Yeah. So it's going to be different for everybody, and I think where they naturally hang out. But I do, just to kind of put numbers to it, I think if I were to average everything out, I'd say 20-ish% over seems to be a reasonable starting point to kind of assess from.
And Berto, you've been as high as 250 pounds before. Do you feel like that was necessary, or was that even productive at all?
It was a fun body, like for sure, and it was cool to say I was 250.
You had a couple 4-pound sandwiches in you at that point too.
God. And yeah, it was evening weight with my clothes. I just needed to get to that number for some reason. See, it was different. It was a different environment. Like there was kids around my age because I was in like my early 20s, and a lot of them were juiced up, and I didn't care. It's like I'm keeping up with you. Like it was the exact opposite. Like I didn't ask anyone who was on the juice and who wasn't. It was just like, no, if he's doing that, then I need to do that too. Like that's how that was. But no, it was not necessary at all. I think I realized that very quickly as soon as I came back down, and I was still hitting PRs like really deep into like that diet. I'm like, wow, I just hit an all-time squat PR at 210. So my best squat PR ever, like my best squat performance ever was like at 210. So I'm like, whoa, okay, maybe that was dead weight. And I was still putting on muscle, I think, if we're being perfectly honest, because I had so much there in the reserves. I think it did more for me when it comes to like a body image sort of deal. Because, I think it's important that people develop like two like different outfits that you really enjoy for different reasons. Your first outfit's going to be like this is just your summer lean body. It's like, okay, it's like I look forward to wearing that. But then, on the other side, the one that to a large extent is the reason that you have that, like, your summer bathing suit is because of like this other guy over here. And that one, it gets overlooked like too often. And I think especially more so for the serious casual bodybuilder, it's like you got to learn to love that, because there's a lot of good things that come from that body, but you just like you don't give it enough time to like settle. Like when I think of myself in the 180s, it's like I think of all the wonderful perks that come with that. It's like, man, I can do some like pretty fun things in the weight room. Like I shoot last off season, I think it was like in the mid 180s, my buddy was deadlifting. I'm like, oh, I'll deadlift with you, whatever. It's like I'm taking a week off and just pulled 525 for like with slow eccentrics for a set of 8. Like just like, oh, that's fun. This body is fun, and I like feeling big in my clothes. So you got to give yourself, like, you got to start building a list of pros when it comes to that. So for the casual bodybuilder, it's like where you go to, it's like going to be kind of a personal preference thing. Just don't let things usually can be a little bit higher than you like, but as you go through more gaining phases, you'll see that other suit you wear, like, just it looks better and better every time. So yeah, for the contest prepper, it's one of those where it's like, okay, we're strictly business here. Our contest weight, like, that is our anchor. But for everyone else, it's like just learn to love them just as much, and eventually Like you can. I see perks to both. And if I'm being perfectly honest, like the physique I hate the most is from a personal standpoint. It's like there for business is my contest prep one. Like it's fun, it's different. But oh no, it's like I had to plan a photo shoot around that thing because I'm like, I don't want my face looking like that on these cute pics I was supposed to get with the girlfriend. So, so yeah, with it, they have a lot more leeway. And I think what a good coach does is like he kind of, he facilitates that process. He's the enabler to some extent because that is what some people need, because Instagram and social media is like thinking it's like, no, you got to go the other way, like at all times. But yeah, and I guess from there, since we talked about how with gaining phases, it's like, okay, I need you to be focused. Like this can't just be like, all right, I guess when I go out with my friends, I'm just gonna eat whatever I want and like eat all their fries and go through leftovers in the fridge. No, that's not what it is. And much like with with fat loss phases, maybe someone who hasn't had a whole lot of successful experiences with previous fat loss phases, it's like, all right, let's do an 8 to 10 weeker. Let's do that, and then we'll put that away for a while. We'll come back, and then next time we can do a 12. I think the same thing with the gaining phases, and I think in the past, and I think this was more so, I should have made it more clear. This is what I was recommending was probably more so for the skinny males that, like they're my height, but they're like 140 pounds. It's like for them, that'd be what I was recommending about like, hey, go 1-2 years without a deficit. Like, absolutely. Like, just do that. But, they're becoming more and more rare. Like when I get one on a Skype, I'm like, oh wow, it's like you are an endangered species. Like they just that does not exist anymore. Yeah, it's like with the gaining phase, the same thing. It's like, hey, let's start with like 6 months of like really focused, and we'll start there, and then eventually we'll get to like 8 months, maybe at some point even 10 months. But that's usually like the length of a gaining phase, like somewhere between 6 to 10, because people generally like need texture in their life. Like it's kind of hard to just focus on one thing for way too long. And then it also, by having these fat loss phases in between those gaining phases, you get to practice fat loss, because like I've done it before where it's like, man, I ain't seen a deficit in a year and a half. I start that deficit, I'm like, this is like, I am so rusty here. Like it takes me a month to get to the point where I'm like, I'm actually kind of sort of doing the things that I'm supposed to be doing. So I think it's good to reward yourself with like one of those. So something, after like 6 months, 8 months of gaining, usually when it comes to the gaining, especially with these numbers thrown around, like, okay, you got to gain like 0.5% to 1% of your body weight. It's like, look, I can't do that. Like, I cannot do that. Like, my life would have to be so regimented. Mm-hmm. Like, it wouldn't be practical. It's like, my gym's big enough where I'd have to tell my girlfriend, Cynthia, I can't go see you in the leg room because you're going to cut into this experiment, So what I like to do with people, and you kind of hinted at this, Brian, is the fact that fat loss is, the reason people like it so much is because it works really, really fast. It doesn't have the biggest impacts necessarily if we're speaking like long term, but it works fast. So if we overshoot it by a little bit, it's like, who cares? That's 2 more weeks of dieting. Like, we'll live. So usually what I'll do is like, okay, you got 6 months to gain anywhere between, 6 to 11 pounds. And like that automatically, like, okay, it's like, okay, we have a general direction. This is enough weight where like the intake wasn't ambiguous. And some months are going to be faster, some months are going to be slower, and like that's okay. And then what ends up happening is usually when people get to wherever they get, say they gain 9 pounds and they like math it out, they're like, oh wow, that was like highly appropriate. Like this 0.75 that I've been trying to like execute, like I actually did it, and it was in a much more relaxed state. Because in general, yeah, gaining is going to be a slightly more relaxed state. And they get to see that. It's like, oh yeah, but we had some structure there. We had something to aim for. I think that's super important. It's like you kind of have to make your goals explicit in the same way that people do with fat loss, basically. But yeah, that's usually the strategy. It's like 6 months for beginners. Then maybe we can tack another 2 months, because another 2 months of training in this state, like that's going to do you some good, especially at that point. And for some people, when they been doing this long enough, it's like, shoot, we can get pretty close to a year, maybe even a year of doing this. And they're able to stay focused on this task for that long. But same thing with the gaining. It's like, I'm gonna give them some ranges. Some months will be slower, some months will be faster. But it all starts with just figuring out what that range is going to be, and make it a little bit more detailed than just like, okay, I'm gonna go on a bulk, bro, because that's usually what people do.
Yeah, so I just kind of similar things. Like a lot of times we'll give, depending on the person, I'll give them a range of like, okay, this is the body weight that I want you to be, like the 140-pounder bro that you were talking about. Okay, you know what? You're going to go away now for 4 months doing this stuff that I just told you, and when you come back, I want you to be between 155 and 162. Make it happen. You've got the guidelines, you've got the protocols here. Make it happen.